There we go.
Probably been on one side.
Good evening. Is that working okay? Okay. Sounds funny out here, but if you're happy, I'm happy. Good evening. I'm Dave Alden with Hello Urban Chat. It's great to see so many of you here tonight. A lot of known faces and a good collection of new. This is our first evening meeting in person since March 11, 2020. It's been a long time. I'm going to start off by welcoming the City of Petaluma folks over here tonight. Mayor Teresa Barrett. City Council Member Delinda Fisher. We've got it for council people here. Okay, but Brian Barnacle was with us for the tour today, was an active participant, so thanks to all of them. For city staff, I know we have Christopher Bolt. I believe Gina is here with us. Anybody missing from staff?
Jared Hall, Transit.
Jared Hall, of course Jared's here. I'm sorry, Jared.
And Josh Minshaw, Public Works.
Josh.
Josh, how you doing, Josh? Yeah, it's been a while. Good to see you. For those new to Urban Chat, we educate and advocate for better land use practices. Our mission statement is structured around housing, alternative transportation, climate action, and sustainable municipal finances. We believe those four create a virtuous cycle. Doing one better results in all being better. It took a lot of people to get us here this evening. I'll start with our sponsors, the City of Petaluma, Foundry Wharf, and Urban Mixed Development. I just got a fourth over dinner, I think, but I probably can't announce it yet. And then there's a long list of donors who are shown on your program. Without the resources that those sponsors and donors provide, this evening couldn't have happened. But I also need to mention the many hands who made it happen. Sharon Kirk was responsible for marketing, graphics, registration, and securing this room. And what a great room for us to meet for our first time back. Thank you, Sharon. Dan Lake is busy with double duty this evening. He's got the video camera set up, and he's upstairs monitoring the sound. Dan, thank you. And then there was Barry Busowitz and Mary Davis doing the greeting, and a whole number of other folks who put flyers up around town, offered ideas for the tour today. It took a lot of people to make this happen. But this evening we're here to listen to one person. Lee Gallagher, author of The End of the Suburbs, writes this. If you look up Minnesota Nice in the dictionary, you might see a picture of Chuck Marohn. She's right. Chuck comes across as a very comfortable, pleasant gentleman. However, looks can be deceiving. After all, Chuck comes from the town where much of the movie Fargo was supposedly based. We've seen the movie, right? Yeah, Brainerd. Like Fargo, he has hidden levels. He's trying in his Minnesota nice way to upend much of what we think we know about how our towns work. Chuck and I share an enjoyment of baseball. This isn't a theory I've shared with him before, but I think being a fan of baseball in the era when statistics were being rethought was good training for being an urbanist, as Chuck is and I try to do. Reading avidly, as Bill James and others argued successfully that batting average, pitcher wins, and saves don't matter nearly as much as we had been told, opened up me and others to the parallel land use argument that Chuck espouses, that development may not pay for itself, that automobile accidents may not be accidents, that relying on funding from above can be hazardous, that we don't have the right to drive fast through downtown, and much more. For those who are new to Chuck's topics, don't worry if they knock your intuition sideways. It took me years to let go of batting average. We only ask that you listen attentively with an open and questioning mind. Speaking of questions, there'll be a short Q&A session after Chuck's presentation. If you don't get a question answered, there's space on the back of your programs to write a note out, hand it to one of us wearing these tags, and we'll get back to you to continue the conversation. Chuck, the stage is yours.
It's all right. Thank you, everybody. It's very exciting to be here on the night when you're all all together again. It's very, very, very special. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Awesome. Let's do that then. Because the microphone that was hands-free was very delightful. It was very nice. But with my glasses, it felt like one of those orthodontic things that they used to put on people in the 80s. And if I use the cordless, then I have one hand. And I'm not as conversant with one hand. Two hands are better. So, if for some reason my voice drops off in the back, we were introducing people at the beginning here, and I'd like to introduce one person before we go too much further. Leah Sham is here from the Vision Zero Network. Can you just, I know you weren't trying to be introduced. And well, I was going to say, I travel around the country and I get to talk in many other places, but it's rare that I get to speak so close to a community that's so close to such an expert resource. So yes, she is in Berkeley.
It's Bethel.
Bethel, I'm sorry.
No worries.
California. And anyway, as part, the Vision Zero Network is a tremendous resource for all the stuff we're going to talk about tonight. Is a close person for you, and so I just wanted to make sure that as we started tonight, you recognize that you have this capacity within your region that you can access. Thank you again. It is very kind of you to invite me here. Minnesota gets like 3 days a year where it's over 90 degrees. That was yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I am missing all three. So it might be hot again this weekend, but it's very nice to be here where my family is back home suffering. We are all here now, but we all remember this, right? We all remember this period of time, and we're going to focus on the transportation part of this, but this period of time when everything kind of changed overnight. When we look at empty highways, I want you all to understand the way that engineers entered the pandemic, the way that traffic professionals entered the pandemic. Because as we look at traffic deaths, or we look at deaths that are caused in automobile crashes, the theory of traffic deaths has always been, it is a function of how many miles are traveled. As we travel more, deaths are going to go up. If we travel less, deaths will go down. When you look at statistics over time, engineers are very, very proud. I'm going to show you a chart in a little bit of how deaths per mile traveled have continued to fall. But overall aggregate deaths have not. And the reason is, according to kind of the standard theory of traffic engineering, is because we're driving more. There's more people, they're driving more miles, thus more crashes and more deaths. The pandemic tested that theory, and it tested it in a really very crystal clear way. The amount of driving went through the floor. And if the theory of safety that our American transportation system is based off of was true, we should have seen deaths also fall dramatically. We saw the exact opposite, right? That's not what we experienced. I want you to see how dramatic the shift in driving was. This is vehicle miles traveled over time. Up and down varies. Hit the pandemic, collapsed through the floor. That picture of an empty highway was not an anomaly. We all experienced this. It was eerie, right? It was eerie. But deaths did not go down. Deaths actually went up. Collisions went up. Violent collisions went up. Traumatic injuries went up. How do we explain this? If the standard theory of traffic safety has no explanation for this, how do we then step out of that theory and explain this anomaly? Does anybody know what kind of the industry insiders said? The industry insiders, the standard traffic safety people, looked at this data and they didn't say, our theory is wrong, or maybe we should re-question things, or maybe we should re-examine the way we approach safety. What they did is they said, no, humans are flawed. And they're now even more flawed than ever. they came up with this idea called the reckless driver. And if you paid attention to traffic safety officials, they said, we're flummoxed by this. Deaths should have gone down, they went up. The only explanation we could come up with is that people have gone crazy. They're insane. They've become far more reckless than they've ever been. You laugh, but this was actually pumped out in major publications again and again and again. The data shows traffic fatalities are up. It's because risky driving behaviors. People all of a sudden said, screw it, we're in a pandemic, I'm not going to wear my seatbelt. I'm going to drive fast, I'm going to drink while driving because I don't care. I'm fatalistic now. Pedestrian deaths spike as reckless driving surges. Again and again and again, we saw this narrative pumped out that all of a sudden we became overnight deranged, crazy, insane people who were out on the road doing reckless things. This is my favorite quote. This is from the LA Times. Reckless driving is, quote, a sign of the overall lack of consideration we're showing for other citizens, whether it be wearing masks or not getting vaccinated or how we drive. It's very aggressive, it's very selfish. Besides being wrong, there's something very important about this particular narrative, and that is its seductiveness. It's a very easy narrative to believe because we all know some instance where someone has driven recklessly. We've all experienced reckless driving. We all know of times and places on a very frequent basis where people drive in ways that we find aberrant, right? That we find not to be socially acceptable. That is a common experience that we all have. And so if someone with initials behind their name or a fancy degree or a title stands up and says, you know what, it's reckless drivers, it's easy for us to affirm that narrative internally because we all have experienced that. But it's still wrong. I want to give you an alternate theory, one that I think is not only more applicable to the actual data and the situation, but one that actually empowers us to do something positive, to actually make a change. This is a chart I talked about earlier, and I will say my apologies to people who hate charts. I am an engineer, although I've retired now officially from the profession. But still, as an engineer, I feel compelled to share at least 2 or 3 charts in every presentation. If you don't like charts, I'm sorry, I will walk you through these. This is a chart that juxtaposes vehicle miles traveled with annual deaths. So the blue line is a representation of vehicle miles traveled. You can think of this as how much we're driving. And the important thing about this is not the nuance, but it's that starting in the early 1900s, we now drive a lot more than we used to. Right? Okay. This is deaths per billion miles. So this chart goes this way. And the important takeaway from the red line is that per mile traveled we go, a lot fewer people now die today than ever before. Engineers point to this and say, look at how ridiculously successful we have been in promoting safety. Because even though we're driving more, the rate of death is way down. And let me give you a statistic that I should blow your mind. If we had the same rate of death per mile traveled that they had in the early automobile age, instead of 40,000 people dying on our roadways a year, we would have over 500,000 people dying on our roadways. So yes, there's been a dramatic increase in safety. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is. But there's been a stubborn, and if you look at this bottom line, you'll see there's been a stubbornness to this line that really hasn't changed since the 1950s, 1960s, where we really have not been able to reduce to any significant degree the amount of death on our roadways. Hold this image in your mind. Driving going up, deaths going down. Because I want to show you another chart, and you'll see a similar pattern. This is a chart of annual per commuter traffic delays over time. Think of this as a chart of congestion. What do you notice about congestion? This starts in the early 1980s, but we could go back even further, but this is a nice little representation. What do you see about congestion here? It goes up, right? Year after year after year, congestion increases. Again, do we experience that? Yes, we experience that all the time. All of us have experienced that phenomenon. Congestion continues to rise. What happened to congestion at the beginning of the pandemic? It went away. Okay? Look at these two charts together. What you can see the similarity to the pattern, right? As the amount we drive goes up, congestion goes up, and what happens? Deaths per mile traveled go down. I want you to picture yourself in congested traffic. How difficult is it to kill somebody with your automobile when you're stuck in congestion? It is very difficult. And so if engineers go out and they create seatbelts and airbags and racks that you sit in within your car that are collapsible, that absorb the pressure of a crash, if engineers go out and widen out lanes and make curves more sweeping and get rid of all the hills and flatten things out, all of that performance additive to your car means nothing when you're stuck in congestion. Right? It adds nothing to what you do when you're stuck in congestion. It is congestion that created the increase in safety, not all these other things. But when the congestion was removed, what we saw revealed to us was what? That the systems that we built are ridiculously dangerous. Ridiculously, ridiculously dangerous. I want to spend the next little bit explaining why. And then I want to talk about what we can do differently and why we urgently need to do something differently. I want to start this part of the conversation with the basic elemental layout of our transportation system, the hierarchical road network. This is almost a kid's drawing, but it represents something intuitive to all of us. Streets go from little to big, from local to collector, collectors pour into arterials, arterials pour into major arterials. If you go to any city in the US, any city that expects to get transportation dollars, they will inevitably have a map that lays out the city in a hierarchical road network. This is like the base DNA for how we build auto-based transportation systems. I want you to think of a watershed. In a watershed, we all recognize that water will run into ditches and creeks. They will flow into brooks and streams. They will come together into rivers. The rivers come together to form major tributaries. We get how this works, right? We understand that if there is rain throughout the watershed, if that rain is intense enough or persistent enough, all that water will come together and we will get a flood. This is hydrology 101. And I took, as an engineer, hydrology 101. We spent about 5 minutes on this concept because it's very simple, it's very easy. But for some reason, when engineers get out of hydrology 101 and they walk across the hall to traffic 101, this same dynamics becomes somehow inexplicable to us. Because we look at a commuter shed and we recognize that when we get a little bit of stuff happening out on the edge, it inevitably comes together and creates a flood. In fact, if we set out as our #1 goal to create the maximum amount of congestion possible, this is the exact system we would design. We would create a system that took everybody that we could possibly put on the road, put them on the road at the same exact time, and funnel them to the same exact place. We literally manufacture a flood every day. This is why congestion is a ubiquitous condition shared by all Americans. We could come here to Petaluma and you have congestion. We can go to San Francisco, they have traffic congestion. We can go to my little hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota, population 14,000. We can go out to the traffic light at 7:50 in the morning And we can ask the people there stuck in traffic, what's the congestion like in Brainerd? And they say, oh, it's horrible. It's unbearable. And 20 minutes later, there'll be no cars on the road, right? This is a shared experience because this system creates the maximum amount of congestion possible everywhere, every single day. The way we respond to congestion as engineers is to over-design, to overbuild, to over-engineer, to try to handle what in a sense is the peak capacity by having overwhelming levels of capacity. This comes from a theory and descends from some knowledge that is known as forgiving design. Forgiving design is the base way that the engineering profession in the US, and I added the US because I think that's an important distinction, has approached traffic safety. In fact, forgiving design is a very old term. If you study this at all recently, we just call this design now. The forgiving part is gone, but the forgiving part is important to understand because it's important to understand why we do what we do. Forgiving design works like this. And by the way, these were ideas developed in the years immediately after World War II, when we were at a frenetic pace building transportation systems across the country. We had to figure out how to do really difficult things at scale very, very, very quickly. And we came up with this approach. And by the way, I'm going to preface this by saying this approach is brilliant and has saved innumerable amount of lives. The idea goes like this. Say we got a 2-lane roadway. Cars going, vehicles traveling in both directions. We know and understand as designers that humans make mistakes. And humans will sometimes, when they're driving, float in the lane. They may look down at the radio, they may talk to someone in the passenger seat, they may be distracted by someone in the back, and they'll float a little bit. When they float, we don't want them to cross the lane and hit someone coming towards them. So what we do is we widen out the lane. We give them a little bit of extra room to move. Now we know and we understand that drivers are human, they're going to make mistakes. We know that sometimes a driver will actually go off the roadway. When they exit the lane completely, we want them to be able to recover and get back on track. We don't want that exiting the roadway to become a traumatic thing. And so what we do is we give a little recovery area on the side. We widen out that, and we create a little shoulder, a little space to recover from. Now we understand that humans make mistakes. Sometimes a driver will actually steer their vehicle completely off the roadway for whatever reason. They're traveling at high speeds. There's a lot of kinetic energy that we need to dissipate before they hit something that won't move. And so what we do is we go out and we create a clear zone so that all that energy can dissipate before they hit something that will create a traumatic experience. This is a forgiving design. And I mentioned earlier the 40,000 deaths a year juxtaposed with the rate that would create over 500,000 deaths a year. That is directly attributable to this. This approach is brilliant. It's been copied around the world. It has saved millions of lives. What is wrong with this approach? This approach works great on the open road. When you are driving long distance, when you're driving from here to San Francisco, this approach will save your life. When you are driving in the middle of town, this approach is deadly. Because what this approach does is it signals to drivers, we got your back. We got everything taken care of. We got you covered. And what do drivers do when we signal to them that we got your back? They drive faster. They take that extra capacity that we have engineered for them and they use it to speed up. Do they do this because they're reckless? Do they do this because they have disregard for humans? Do they do this because they're too busy to get where they're going to be? No, they do this because they are human. They do this because they are human. When we create situations like this in an urban area, and understand what an urban area is. An urban area is complexity. In an urban area, you are going to have, if we just look at vehicles, very different from a highway or the open road. In an urban area, you will have cars that randomly stop, randomly pull up, randomly turn left across traffic. make all kinds of random movements. That's just people driving. You also have people walking, people riding bikes, people in wheelchairs. You also have kids who chase a ball out into the street. You have all kinds of randomness in an urban area that you don't have on the open road. When we signal to drivers that we got your back, what we tell them to do is shut off your brain. You don't have to worry about what's going on. Go ahead and drive fast because we got you covered. And that's the wrong signal to send. This is not, how do I say this? For those of us not in this business, this can sometimes be shocking to recognize that there is not a discernible difference between the way we design or the approach we use in urban areas and the approach we use on the open road. But I want to tell you that that is actually the case here in this country. We do not have two different bodies of knowledge. We have one body of knowledge that is applied in both situations. If you go to the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is sometimes called the Bible by transportation professionals. This is the book we use to discern how we should do traffic control on the transportation systems we build. And you try to discern what's the difference between in the middle of Petaluma and on the edge of Petaluma. You can look up the definition of a street, and honest to God, it says street, see highway. In other words, there is no discernible difference. This puts us in this situation where, in order to create a margin of safety for drivers, we will design a street for 60-mile-an-hour travel. Then, to make things safe for people not driving, we will put a speed limit of 25 miles an hour. And then we will actually witness people driving 40, 45 miles an hour. We are sending mixed signals. We are designing incorrectly. I put this slide in here, and I always debate on whether to do this, and after our discussion today, I thought, yeah, I want to do this. So I'm gonna do this. This is a traffic signal. This is the pedestal of a traffic signal. You'll see right here what we often call the beg button, right? People are expected to stand here, press the button, and then wait for their opportunity to cross the street. We have one of these right out here. I've used it a couple times today. We all have experienced this. I want you to look closely at that pedestal though. And you'll see that the steel comes down and then it sits on a concrete pedestal. And there's a little bit of a gap right at the bottom. I'm going to show you a side view of it in the gap. Right here you'll see there's a little pin in between the actual arm of the signal and the concrete pedestal it's on. That is a shear pin. Why do we have a shear pin on this pedestal? Well, the reason we have a shear pin is because drivers were driving their automobiles so fast in urban areas, and they would lose control or go off the road and hit traffic signals, the signal pole. And when the signal pole was fastened to the ground, that act of colliding with the pole would create such a traumatic injury for the driver that they were suffering death, concussions, all kinds of horrible things. And so the shear pins make this pole what is called a breakaway pole. So if you hit it, all that energy, all that kinetic energy, that momentum of your vehicle, the mass times velocity of your vehicle will hit that pole, and the pole will absorb it by collapsing so that the driver does not suffer injury or has a lower amount of injury they would suffer. Now let's back up again. Do you see the place where you stand to press the button? Right? So what you have here from a design standpoint is an obsession with the safety of a driver driving very fast. Because we recognize that in these environments, drivers are driving very fast, right? We've designed them with forgiving design. We've created all kinds of over-engineering, over-capacity. We witness drivers driving very fast. And because we're obsessed with reducing death for drivers, we create the breakaway pole. You see the distance here, right? In the same place, we create the breakaway pole, we create the button for the individual to stand. It's hard to stomach this. And you know, you can recognize that humans are breakaway, thereby not offending the designers and the parameters that they look at. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt because they are humans as well. But this is a huge dissonance within the profession. In legal terms, the notion of gross negligence is the conscious indifference to the safety of others. It's hard not to see this as systematic gross negligence. There's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. We put together a list of like the books that every Strong Towns advocate should read. I can't remember how many on the list, but this is like one of the top 2. It's a ridiculously important book. I'll summarize. It's like this thick too. It's not an easy read. I'll summarize it for you if you don't want to read it. Human beings are slightly evolved chimpanzees. The act of reading this book is an act of recognition of how irrational and stupid you are. And Kahneman and his collaborator Amos Tversky, who's unfortunately passed away, this goes through a series of like experiments that they did and tests that they did and things that they did to kind of prove humans are irrational. We think we're very, very smart. We think we're very rational. We think we're always using our rational mind. And instead, what they discovered and learned and proved is that we react to things without thinking. Thinking fast, thinking slow. Thinking fast is what they call System 1. System 1 is your intuition, your very quick mental process. If I ask you all what 1 + 1 is, everybody here can answer 2. You don't have to go through any deep thought. You don't have to crowd anything out of your brain. You can all answer that question very quickly. But if I asked you to add 1,753 plus 4,600, somebody could do that, right? Somebody in this room is a freak and can do that. Most of us could not. Most of us, if we were going to do that in our brain, would have to pause, crowd everything else out, so we could focus on that math problem, carry the 1, do all this mental, and then we could come up with an answer. That is System 2. System 2 is the deep thinking, engaged, crowd everything else out of your brain. My daughter, last Saturday, took the ACT test. The ACT test is literally sitting in one space for like 4 hours answering questions. She got done with it and she was exhausted. Why are you exhausted after the ACT test? Because you are spending 4 hours in System 2. System 2 is exhausting. It's really hard. Humans cannot stay in System 2 very long. Okay. This is where the safety activists always get mad at me. But you have to understand this because it's critical. Engineers know this. It's critical that you know it too. Driving is a System 1 activity. It is something we do with the passive part of our brain. A lot of us would like it to be a System 2 activity. We would like it if every time you got behind the wheel, for every second you were driving, you were fully engaged, fully concentrated, 100% focused on the road. Oftentimes when there's a crash, people will get mad because you were paying attention. Humans cannot be in System 2. Now, if driving were a System 2 activity, only jet fighter pilots and race car drivers could do it. Think of your own behavior. If you are driving, how many of you listen to the radio? How many of you sing along to a song? How many of you feel comfortable talking to someone in the passenger seat? We all do, right? And the reason we do is not because we're reckless drivers. Although, by the definition of reckless driver, everyone in this room is a reckless driver. Because that's reckless driving. We do it because we are human. Driving is a System 1 activity. It's one we do passively. It's one we engage in with the System 1 subconscious part of our brain. Here's the important implication for this. And it's an implication that engineers know and understand. The implication of it is this. People are going to drive the speed they feel comfortable driving regardless of any other factor. Because driving is a System 1 activity, something we do passively without actively engaging our brains, people are going to drive the speed they feel comfortable driving regardless of any public safety campaign, any signs you put up, how many of you have been driving along the road and you see the police officer on the side of the road? What is the first thing you do? The first thing you do is probably take your foot off the gas. The second thing you do is look at your speedometer. Then you will look in the rearview mirror, right? Yes. To see if he pulled up. We've all shared this experience. It's not because we're all reckless drivers, it's because we're all human drivers. Now, seeing that police officer told you to slow down, right? And oftentimes they'll post police officers where they want people to slow down because it has that effect. But the next time you drove through that area and there was no police officer, what did you do? You drove the speed you felt comfortable driving because you are human. All of these campaigns we do to shame people into driving slower, to shame people into being more aware. We have the one in the Midwest, I don't know if you have it out here, the Start Seeing Motorcycles campaign. As if I ever stopped wanting to see motorcycles, right? Like I'm consciously trying to avoid seeing them. These are campaigns that deny what we know about human nature. What we know about human nature is that we respond to the environment that we're put in. Engineers know this clearly, and we use this as a device when we're designing highways on the open road. If you go on the open road, what you will see is that there's a very clear way of establishing what a safe speed is. I used to work for the state DOT as an intern way back in the 1990s. And we would get these calls from cities who says, people are speeding through our city. And we would go out there, they'd send me out there with a radar gun, and I would sit and I would write down the speed that people were driving. And we'd come back and we'd say, okay, that's a speed study. Is there excessive speeding? And if the answer was yes, what would we do? We would raise the speed limit. And the city would flip out. But let me tell you, that was the right thing to do. Because on the open road, on the highway, the most dangerous thing is not speed. Oftentimes you hear the speed kills, speed kills. No. On the open road, it's not speed that kills, it's differential in speed. If everybody's driving 70 miles an hour in the same direction, that's a really safe thing. Especially if there's no on or off or any, making movement. Everybody's just driving, it's ridiculously safe. The amount of miles traveled, the amount of deaths per mile traveled are really, really low in such environments. What causes the traumatic crashes is when you have a differential in speed. When your speed limit is off, and someone forces themselves into system 2 to drive 45 when everybody else is driving 70. That's where you get crashes. That's where people die. Engineers know this. And so what they do is they say, when people are speeding, we need to raise the speed limit so that the 85th percentile speed, as we call it, matches the speed of traffic. Because driving is a System 1 activity. Now I said earlier, there's no parallel knowledge base for local streets. This does not work on local streets. There's a very different approach we have to take. We go out and we do a speed study. Are people, I think I just unplugged everything. I did. It's okay, I'm a professional. Yeah. So we go out and we do a speed study on a local street. People are speeding, yes. What is the answer then to that conundrum? We have to change the street design. We have to design the street differently. Because what's going on is that our design is actually signaling to drivers the wrong thing. We're actually telling drivers that it's okay to drive this higher speed in this place. We need to redesign the street. It's all plugged back in. It's on. The screen just didn't come back on. It's okay. We'll make it work. Yeah. Although I do think that I have to hit some things here. Yeah.
Took a while to come back up.
Oh, did it? It's okay. This creates this strange situation. Again, where we have an imbalance between the design speed, the speed that we have designed the place to drive, and the speed we actually desire people to be driving. At Strung Towns, we have a saying, if you need a sign to tell people to slow down, you design your street wrong. You ever see those big signs out that they're blinking? They say, here's your speed that you're going, please slow down. Every time you see one of those, what you are looking at is a design failure. You are looking at a place where instead of actually fixing the failure of the design, you are trying to compensate for it by having what is really a stupid sign. This one I actually have to show you. Oh, good, it came back up. If you go to a standard engineering manual, you are likely to see a chart like this. And the chart like this explains this trade-off between mobility and access. And I'm going to define those terms for you in human terms. This is the way engineers talk. Mobility is getting somewhere, and land access is being somewhere. So there's a trade-off between transportation systems that get you somewhere and transportation systems that are somewhere, right? Okay. Arterials, collectors, locals. In this hierarchy, there's a trade-off. If you're on an arterial, we can get you somewhere really quickly, but you're not going to have much stuff there, right? If you're in a local street, there's going to be a lot of stuff there, but you're not going to be able to move very quickly, right? Okay. Then, there's this magic place in the middle where you can both be somewhere and get somewhere at the same time. We call this California. This is the collector. And really, in all seriousness, like 90% plus of our transportation investments over the last 2 decades have been in that middle category. Almost everything you build here is in this middle category in terms of this trade-off, trying to have your cake and eat it too, so to speak. From a financial standpoint, what we see is that we can build great connections between places and have that pay off with value created in those places. We can build great interstates and great highways and make them work really well. We can build great places and have the private investment come in and create wealth in a place and make great streets have huge financial payoffs for our communities. But it's this stuff in the middle, this stuff that I spent the whole afternoon looking at in your city as we went and toured around, that is destroying your budget. It's ridiculously expensive. And on a per foot basis, it has a negative return on investment. This is predominantly what you build, and it's bankrupting you. Simultaneously, what we see is that we can build things that are really safe when we're moving people quickly without the complexity of a place. An interstate is a ridiculously safe travel system, particularly over long distances. Likewise, on local streets, we can build things that are really safe because the speeds are really low. Insurance companies will tell you there's a high percentage of crashes on local streets. That is true, but they're all fender benders, dented doors. There's a lot of claims that happen, but they're not of the fatalities, traumatic injury type. The fatalities and traumatic injuries happen right here. They happen when you combine high speed with complexity. When you try to combine being in a place with getting through a place. If you take this chart and you flip it on its side and ask a different question, you get a very different answer. What is the speed that we create the most value for our investments? And what I'm going to show you is that, or tell you, is that we create the most value at very low speeds when we're building local streets, and at very high speeds when we're building great roads that connect places. But we create the least amount of value the more we get away from those two ends. This is an area in the middle that we call the Strode. A Strode is a street road hybrid. We call this the futon of transportation. If you think of a futon as an uncomfortable bed that makes into an uncomfortable couch, it tries to do two things at once, right, and fails at both. A Strode tries to do two things at once, and it fails at both. It tries to both be a street, a platform for building wealth in a place, and it tries to be a road, a high-speed connection through a place. And it does neither well. Your city is filled with Strodes. And your highest level of crashes, your highest level of tension, your worst places to drive are all on your Strodes. Your city is dominated by them. We have to have an active program to get rid of our Strodes. And in fact, I'm often asked, okay, Chuck, you oppose the federal highway bill. You oppose the state transportation bill. What do you support? I don't support building more of the crap that we're building. I don't support over-engineering and over-designing our systems. What I support is a project that would take this nation of Strodes that we've built and convert those Strodes into wealth-producing great streets and really safe connections between places. We need an active program now of going back to our prior transportation investments and actually making them productive and valuable for us. I'm going to tell you right now how to do this. And I'm going to preface it by saying, from a technical standpoint, it's ridiculously easy. The hard part is the cultural overlay we have. Okay? If we want to go from Strode to street, what do? Well, the first thing we have to do is slow traffic down. A great street can't have fast through traffic. So we have to actually design the street for people to drive slow. We started the day out here at this intersection, and it was amazing because there was all like this pushback and controversy over the notion that you shouldn't have a 4-lane road right through the middle of town where you're trying to have people walk across the street. Like, that was crazy. You should have parking along the street and slow speeds. Are we trying to build a place or get through a place? If we want to build a place, we got to slow down traffic. We have to prioritize. And I use the engineering word, pedestrians. We have to prioritize people in the place. If we're trying to build a place requires people to make it work. We have to prioritize them on foot, on bike, on wheelchairs, whatever that. We have to prioritize them over the throughput of traffic. The throughput of traffic, I don't give a damn if they're trying to get to the beach. I was told today we can't slow down anybody through town because they're trying to get to the beach. I'm like, I don't give a damn. You're going to drive slower for 4 blocks, right? Like, you'll get to the beach 20 seconds later. If we're going to build a place, a successful place, we actually have to prioritize being in the place over getting through the place, right? If we're going to build a place, and this is where California struggles uniquely, we actually have to build stuff. We actually have to have a permitting approach, a land use approach that allows us to make investments and thicken up buildings, build places. We have to allow the 1-story buildings to become 2-story buildings. We have to allow people to live above them. We have to do normal human neighborhood things that you've made illegal kind of everywhere, right? We have to embrace complexity. What you'll find about streets is that you can't open up a manual and have a street design. You actually have to go out and meet with people and talk to them and figure out what's going on and customize a street to the place. And the street will evolve and change over time. If we're going to go the other way, street to road, it's just the exact opposite. We want to speed traffic up. We want to get people moving. So we got to limit accesses. We got to slow down all those, get rid of all those conflict points, get things moving. We have to separate our automobiles from our other ways of getting around. We looked at a number of places today where you had high-speed traffic with this dinky bike lane on the side. There's no way to design that to be safe. We need bike lanes that are roads that connect places, but they need to be separate. They need to be safe. We have to resist the temptation to degrade our land use or degrade our road capacity in order to get short-term land use gains. The idea that our highways are these massive investments that we collectively make in mobility, but that we're going to put an interchange every mile and actually muck up the roadway in order to get a what? A big box store and a gas station and a crappy development? I mean, you are taking a massive investment that you've made in mobility and just destroying it for what is a negative returning local investment. This is the most obscene thing that we regularly do. We need to simplify way down. Roads are very, very simple. So let's go back to this problem. Because I feel like as an engineering profession, as a society, we have in a sense solved this problem. I'm not suggesting we don't get floods, but we actually know how to alleviate and fix this problem, and we've done a lot of things to do it. How do we solve this problem? We used to go out and build dams and levees and spillways and all this stuff. We recognize that like that doesn't work because we got to maintain that stuff. We don't have money to maintain that stuff. People don't use that as a safety buffer. They move right up to it, and then the dam starts to go bad, and everybody freaks out because we're going to kill 100,000 people, right? This doesn't work. We don't do that anymore. That's not how we deal with this problem. How do we deal with this problem? What we do is we go out to this part of the watershed, and we say, I'm sorry, you can't fill your wetland. I'm sorry, you can't run your water straight into the ditch. You have to store it and let it percolate in on site. You can't contribute to the flood. Oh, but it's just a little bit. Yeah, it's a little bit everywhere. That's what creates a flood, a little bit everywhere. Hold that thought. How do we solve this? We think we can solve it. The theories of engineering we have say we'll solve it by adding more lanes, building more bridges, building more interchanges. Maybe we'll put in a transit line and pretend that people will ride it, even though we've got a crappy station around it and nobody can get to it, right? I know, let's have electric cars. That will help. How do we actually solve this problem? We build neighborhoods. We have to actually absorb these trips before they enter our system. We have to actually allow people to walk to the corner store, to walk to school, to walk to their job, to take a bike to where they want to go. I mean, you live in the most beautiful climate in the country. This should be 90% of your trips instead of 2%. We have to build neighborhoods. That's the way we solve this problem. We're never going to build enough. I mean, so I'll do this modest diversion and then we'll get back on track. Am I okay on time, by the way? I'm just kind of going. So. We passed an infrastructure bill last year. We passed an infrastructure bill last year. What is the one thing? So the president, and please, I'm not a partisan person, so if you're going to hear this as a partisan thing, just try to suppress that for a couple minutes. Because I'm going to say some things about the president and about Congress, a pox on all of them in terms of transportation. They're all devils in my mind. When it comes to this issue, you can believe whatever you want about anything else, but the administration proposed the American Jobs Plan. In the American Jobs Plan, I want to say it this way. What was the reaction to the American Jobs Plan? Amongst Democrats, the marketing brochure was, this is the largest investment in infrastructure ever. It's a huge catch-up, right, for years of neglect. We've overlooked these systems for too long, and now we are going to make good with this massive, massive public investment. The reaction from Republicans was what? This is a massive, massive amount of spending. This is a reckless amount of money. It is enormous. It's huge. The one thing that both parties agreed on right out of the gate was that this was a massive bill. Right? Okay. In that bill, the first page, it identified 170,000 miles of major roadway in this country that is currently in poor condition. Of the 170,000 miles in poor condition, the massive bill was proposing to fix 20,000 of them. 20,000 of 170,000. Over the next decade, I'm here to tell you that we are going to add more than 20,000 miles to the backlog of poor places over the next decade. So we are making a massive investment in infrastructure, and a decade from now, after that investment, we are going to have more lane miles in poor condition than when we started. The American Jobs Plan identified 45,000 bridges in a state of disrepair, in urgent need of repair. This is not bridges that it's functionally obsolete. This is like, we need to fix this bridge, it's going to fall down. This is a problem. 45,000. The American Jobs Plan proposed of the 45,000 to fix 10,000. What happened to the bill after it got proposed? It got whittled down. So the end result was actually worse than that. Here's the takeaway. Caltrans is broke. Totally broke. You have more lane miles that you have built as a state than you have any expectation ever to be able to maintain. And every hope, dream, and wish that they have is dependent on massive infusions of money from the federal government that are never going to happen. We are actually going to have a smaller system in the future than we have today. And once you wrap your mind around that, all this craziness of building this stuff and adding new lanes and expanding this and expanding that becomes just an insanity. It looks nutty, right? The only solution we have now is to start building neighborhoods, start building actual places. So let's talk about how we do this. And I have a whole presentation on this topic. I'm going to go through it quickly in 5 minutes. I wrote a whole book kind of about, the second half is about this. So if you're interested in delving deeper into this, there's all kinds of stuff on our website and all kinds of stuff you can get into. But essentially, we need to respect the fact that cities need to grow. Cities, historically, throughout history, have been places that have grown incrementally. This is 3 photos of my hometown of the exact same street taken roughly 30 years apart. You'll see iterations of the place changing from small to big to bigger. This is the way cities have historically grown. After World War II, we decided, nope, cities are places we build all at once. We build them to a finished state, and then we're going to lock them into amber. Never shall they change, world without end, right? That's it. And that is not normal. And we can see the tension and the stress because of that. We have to change our codes, we have to change our approach, we have to change our way of thinking about cities, away from being static things that we build and then defend with everything we have, to things that evolve and change over time. Now, I am not in the YIMBY-NIMBY debate the soulmate of anybody. Everybody has tension with me. And they have tension with me because at Strong Towns we have this adage that we say over and over again. No neighborhood should experience radical change. Yes, NIMBYs, you are right. Your neighborhood should not be unrecognizable to you a decade from now. You shouldn't come in and buy up a whole block and put in a 6-story condo unit when you have a neighborhood of single-family homes. I agree with you. But no neighborhood can be exempt from change. The rate of change everywhere has to be greater than 0. We have to allow natural, easy evolution of our neighborhoods. And I'm going to give you a marker to have in your brain in terms of a regulatory standard you need to get to. Someone who lives in a single-family home in a neighborhood of single-family homes should be able to go to City Hall Monday morning at 9 a.m. with a completed application to convert their house into a duplex or to build an accessory dwelling unit. And they should be able to walk out by noon with an approved permit and start building at 1 o'clock. That's the standard we need to get to. And if we can get to that standard, we will start to see our neighborhoods evolve and change and adapt. We'll start to build neighborhoods the way that we need to. We need to in a radical and dramatic way, lower the bar of entry. I'm not going to lecture you beyond pointing out that I was going to say the rest of the country. I don't know if that is absolutely true. 48 of the states, let's say. I'm having fun now. Much of the rest of the country looks at you as living in a state of cognitive dissonance, where your actions are so out of line with your very loudly and prominently stated values, which, by the way, you export to everybody, proudly and loudly, that it creates this massive dissonance, right? We are for the poor. We are for the disadvantaged. We are for the people who struggle, but not in my neighborhood, in someone else's neighborhood. It's a huge dissonance. If you all know this exists, I'm not speaking out of church about something, but it's painful, right? We have to actually very intentionally lower the bar of entry, because what we have done, and I think for a lot of good reasons, a lot of good, wholesome, honest reasons, we have systematically raised the bar of entry to where the price for fully participating in our society is too high. I'm going to give you two examples of this. This is something in my community we call a tiny house. My ancestors in the same community would have called this a house. For some reason, we have put the adjective tiny on it and made it something like weird and freakish in our code. If you want to build a tiny house, you have to meet all the provisions of a house. Then you have to meet subpart A through M of the tiny house ordinance. You've got to go out and ask your neighbors for permission. You've got to genuflect in front of the planning board. You have to do all these like absurd things to build what is essentially a starter home. People for thousands of years around the world built starter homes. They would build modest little structures with the money they had or limited resources. As their families grew, as their resources grew, they would put an addition on, they'd have a second kid, you'd put a second floor on, the neighbor would come over and help, they'd help her. This is how a country of poor people built wealth. We've taken this off the table today and said, no, this is so patently offensive to us, you can't do it. Why? Why have we chosen that the only thing a person of modest means is allowed to do is live in an apartment on the far edge of town? We are not allowing people to fully participate in our society, and these are people who have a lot to contribute. Let me give you a second example. This is from Muskegon, Michigan. And this is the dichotomy because California is way more insolvent than Michigan. But because you have a lot of growth, you don't feel it the way they do in Michigan, right? They feel poorer, you are poor. Because they feel poorer, they're very innovative. They do things. They had a gap in their streetscape. They also had a downtown that was struggling to get local entrepreneurs. They put these two things together and they said, you know what? We got a city full of poor people. And guess what? Poor people are the most entrepreneurial people in society. You think Silicon Valley is full of entrepreneurs? No, no, no. The most entrepreneurial people you are ever going to find are poor people. And you know why? Because they have to be every day. What they did here is they took a bunch of storage sheds. They painted them all funky colors. They filled in a gap they had in the streetscape where there was a parking lot that kind of made the walking not that great. And they rent them out month to month at really low rates to startup entrepreneurs. Yeah. What is an entrepreneur in this example? It's a crazy person with an idea who doesn't know that they can fail, right? They have a passion. And so what they did is they created a soft landing space for them. If someone wanted to go into the downtown in Muskegon, they were going to have to sign a long-term lease. A lot of the buildings needed hundreds of thousands of dollars of renovations to meet building codes and what have you. It was too high of a bar to cross for startup entrepreneurs. But here, go and try. Try and fail. Fail again, fail again, fail again. If you go to Muskegon, Michigan today and go to their downtown, you're going to find it's full of local businesses. And a lot of those local businesses got their start here, had proof of concept, and were able to, with confidence, take that next step. That's how we create the society where more people can participate. Finally, we need to change dramatically our public investment strategy. I won't go into the whole conversation about why we have the strategy we do, except to simplify it down to, at the end of World War II, the problem we were trying to solve was to stay out of the Great Depression. And the way we stayed out of the Great Depression is we created an economy that grew very quickly. If we could invest in infrastructure, if we could invest in highways, if we could subsidize housing, we could make an economy grow very, very quickly. And we did. If you look at the cities, particularly here in California, what did they do? They went from this to this in a very short period of time. Growth, transactions. What resulted from a city standpoint is a huge amount of area with not enough wealth and capacity within it to actually take care of itself, to actually sustain itself. And so our investment strategy needs to shift from one of growth, how do we get the next development, the next thing, to how do we thicken up and make really good use of what we have. That is a radically different investment strategy. And it's one that needs to center around responding to how people use the city. Instead of trying to build the next thing, we're actually trying to make good use of what we have. At Strong Towns, we've created a 4-step approach to making the lowest risk, highest returning investments that we can make as a public, as a community. I'm going to go through them right now. It is very, very simple. Step number 1, go out and humbly observe where people in the community struggle. I'm going to emphasize humility. You have to free your brain of everything that you think you know, everything that you think should be there, and go out and actually observe. Don't walk a mile in someone's shoes, walk with them. Try to understand where the city is difficult for people to use as it's been built. My gosh, we were out today, and it would just beat you over the head every place we stopped. This is really hard. This is really difficult for people in this space to actually use it as it's been built. There's an endless number of opportunities if we humble ourselves to observe them. Step number 2 then, ask ourselves a question. What is the next smallest thing we can do right now to address that struggle? Notice I did not say, how do we fix this forever? What is the big project we can do? What is the state grant or the federal money we can get to do the big project I've always wanted to accomplish out here? No, the question we're asking ourselves is, how do we alleviate this struggle using the stuff we've got on hand? What can we do with cones and paint and duct tape and straw bales to not solve this forever, but to just make it a little bit easier? Step number 3 then, do that thing. Do that thing right now. Don't hire a consultant. Don't send it to a committee. Don't study it for 6 months. It's a tiny little thing. Just go out and do it. And then step number 4 is repeat the process. Repeat it over and over and over again. Jane Jacobs describes cities as co-creations, things we build together. She did that description back in a day when that's what cities were. They were things that we built together. Today, cities are places where we pay our taxes, expect more services than what we're willing to pay, and bitch about it when it doesn't work out. That's a model that doesn't work for anybody. If we can get back to a humble observation of where people struggle, taking incremental steps, what we will do is we will see that people, humans in our space, will reveal to us what the best investments are. Their actions and their responses to the things we do will actually show us the next urgent thing that needs to be done. And we continue to scale those up and scale those up and scale those up in response to the things that people do in our communities. This is how we thicken our places up. This is how we make them work in the age that we are in. I want to end this conversation by walking you through the design process and showing you the consensus that exists for change. When engineers design a street, there's a very simple process that we go through. We start with the design speed. What is the speed that people are expected to drive through here? We then ask, what is the volume? How many cars are we anticipating handling? Given that speed and that volume, we go to the manual and we say, what is a safe way to build this street? And then how much is that going to cost? It's that process, the design process, that actually creates kind of these 4 unique steps that we use that form almost a hierarchy of values. We begin with one, we proceed to the next, we proceed to the next, and we proceed to the next. These are the values embedded in our design process. Engineers won't call them values, they won't even call them priorities, but this is the process that we use and the steps we go through. This is my house. This is my street. This is where I live. If you're ever in Brainerd, look me up. I'll be happy to grab a coffee with you or go out to eat or whatever. This is the sidewalk to my house. This is the street that I live on. It's 4th Street North in Brainerd, Minnesota. I want you, and this is going to be the public participation part, so you have to speak up. I want you to imagine the street where you live, or a street where you would like to live. And I am going to ask you, if you were in charge of the design process, what values you would prioritize. Would you, we're going to do this together, would you prioritize as your #1 value the design speed? We want to make sure that vehicles can travel at a minimum speed through here. Would you prioritize the volume of traffic? We want to make sure we can accommodate a certain volume. Would you prioritize safety? Safety as a high priority? Or would you prioritize the cost? We want to make sure that our investments are cost effective. So altogether, would you prioritize speed, volume, safety, or cost?
Safety.
All right. We prioritize safety. Would we now shift to prioritizing speed? We want to make sure that we, reach a minimum speed, traffic can get through. Are we interested in dealing with volume, or is cost and cost effectiveness our highest priority at this point? Would we prioritize speed, volume, or cost? I can't change these as we go. So. If there's a trade-off between speed and volume, we can move cars at a high speed, but fewer will get through. Or we can move a higher volume of traffic, but it will be at lower speeds. Would we choose speed or volume? Volume. Okay. Look what you did, right? Look what you did. Yeah, you took the approach we use now and essentially inverted it. I want to point out 2 important things here, because you heard everybody, right? I want to point out 2 important things. First of all, you all prioritized not only safety over everything else, but I want you to look where speed is. You all almost uniformly said, we prioritize speed the lowest. We will sacrifice speed in order to improve safety and in order to improve the cost effectiveness of our investment. We are willing to deprioritize speed to that extent. Here's the second thing I want to point out. You guys all agree. I'm going to tell you, you're not alone. I've done this in rooms of engineers. And guess what the engineers say? Exactly the same thing that you do. Do you know why? This might be hard to believe. They are humans too. These are a human set of values that we've put in place here. And here's the takeaway. You're going to be at a meeting at some point in the future, and you're going to be talking about taking out a lane for parking, or narrowing stuff down, or slowing things down. And someone's going to show up and they're going to say, oh my gosh, we can't do that. It'll slow down traffic. People won't be able to get to the freaking beach. What was it today? Right? It's going to be madness. We can't do this. And there's going to be a part of you in your heart that believes that you are alone in prioritizing safety over speed. that all of your neighbors and all of your friends and everybody else in the community disagrees with you. And in fact, might find you kooky if you stand up and say so. I want you to recognize that not only do people not find you kooky, everyone agrees with you. Everyone already agrees with you because it's a human thing to do. Don't be shy in demanding that we sacrifice speed in order to improve safety. I think everybody in this room has probably heard of the Complete Streets idea. Complete Streets came as a reaction to a recognition that our streets were designed for automobiles with everything else as an afterthought. And that this was a horrible way to build places. And so Complete Streets kind of evolved to, in a sense, graft onto the existing transportation paradigm and provide a little bit of accommodation for people who are not in an automobile. This is a very American concept. There's a kind of a separate but equal kind of feel to it, right? I describe this in the book as there's like an Oprah-like quality. You're in a car, you get a lane. You're in a bus, you get a lane. You're walking, you get a lane. You get a lane, you get a lane. Everybody gets a lane, right? When Complete Streets came out, I was a young engineer, and the reaction to this was very negative. Streets are for cars. Why are we being asked to do all this stuff? Over time, I've watched the engineering profession evolve to the point now where I see most engineers embracing a Complete Streets concept. I don't see engineers fighting it, I see engineers embracing it. I think there's two reasons why. Reason number one, there's a lot more money to build Complete Streets. And so there's a little bit of like plying people into acquiescence because it's easier to get funding, right? It's a human reaction. But the second one, I think, is more important. Complete Streets does not challenge the engineering design paradigm. In fact, it grafts onto and accommodates it. The idea of designing for speed, volume, safety, and cost is very consistent with a Complete Streets approach. Complete Streets accommodate pedestrians in an auto-dominated environment. I want to contrast that with where we are trying to get to, where we need to be. A strong towns approach, a great street, is one that accommodates automobiles in an environment dominated by people. It's people that build wealth. It's people that start businesses. It's people that create families. It's people that fall in love. It's people that invent great things. We design places for people, and they are amazing. We need to be centered on that. We need to be focused on that. And if we are, we're going to find that despite the despair we went through today when we looked at some of these places, there's so much opportunity in this city to build great things, things that you can be really proud of, things that you can pass on to others. And I'm just going to encourage you, as a final word, to embrace the idea of less is more, a humble approach, one where you work incrementally, neighborhood by neighborhood, is going to do wonders for you. It's against the California ethos, right? Like everything has to become big, everything has to become huge, everything has to become top down. Resist that. You have the capacity to do so much from the bottom up. Thank you, everybody, for your time. If you are, my staff gets mad if I don't say some things at the end. If you are interested in this message, strongtowns.org is our website. We publish articles every weekday, like 3 a day. We've got 3 different podcasts. We do a lot of videos. We're on social media everywhere. Our stuff is all Creative Commons licensed, which means we have written it for you to use. So if I have written something on our website and you're like, wow, that's really smart, you can take it, copy, paste it into something, and pretend you wrote it. And we're completely fine with that. Because we are trying to get these ideas out as many If you're really, really excited about this message, there's a lot of opportunities for you on our website to plug in and engage. We have a thing called Local Conversations. We've got a great group here. It's doing a lot of work. I encourage you to connect and plug in with them. I mentioned Leah earlier is a great local resource. You've got a lot of stuff going for you here. If you're really, really, really excited about this message, Strong Towns is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit. We're members driven. If you want to help us, go to our website, sign up to become a member. It would mean a ton to us. So please, you want me to just call on people? I'm happy to do that. Anybody have a question? You're so enthusiastic with your hand.
Yeah, I know you toured our city today. You mentioned you saw a lot of problem spots.
Yeah.
And
I was taking 2 problem spots. Right.
And I'd just like to get a sense of what really stood out to you, and in particular, were there any spots where you saw that thing of, they should just do this right now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, great question. Let me answer that in the macro and then answer that specific one at the end. California is blessed with so many things, but you are cursed with the time you matured, right? Some of us mature at times that are beneficial. I happen to be a Gen Xer, which means that my investment portfolio did not do well as someone born 20 years earlier than me. If you are a boomer, you were a stupid fool and just put your money into anything and it grew. I have lived through .com, housing, and now everything bubbles, and my portfolio didn't do as well as a result. So we all are a byproduct of when we matured. You, as a state, matured post-1950. And because of that, you are burdened with the insolvency of the post-war development pattern. Again, a pattern created around growth, not around building wealth. And so when we go into the business park, it makes me depressed because those are static buildings, not designed to change and evolve, that are actually a financial anchor around your community that you're also dependent on for jobs and what have you. It's a difficult situation. We went out to a community center that you had with a big, huge Strode in front of it. You're building apartments across the street. And I get why you're doing it. You need housing. You're desperate for housing, especially affordable housing. But my gosh, do we really want to put affordable housing on a Strode with its back to the street where we expect people to walk across to the park? It's like we've left ourselves a ton of bad options, and it depresses me. This is what we see all throughout California. You have huge, huge challenges. That being said, you have a beautiful downtown that is in a 3rd grade level of maturing. If you could get it to a junior high level of maturing over the next 30 years, you would be astounded at how great it would be, right? I'm saying, like, let's keep, the surrounding neighborhood is also very high potential, right? It was here before you started this crazy auto experiment. You've got a chance to thicken that up. Let me give you the one that just stood out to me right away. You have this oxymoron called the smart station. And I'm a big critic of California Rail. California Rail projects have done more to undermine rail projects around the country than anything else. Because you put these massive investments into rail projects, and then they sit there on land encumbered all around it, next to highways that people won't cross, next to like big fields that no one's building on, next to like it was like a muffler shop or something. You do nothing to get the thing moving and going. And I looked at that and I said, this is such low-hanging fruit. Such ridiculously low-hanging fruit. And you may need to go in with some elbows and bust some jaws to break things loose, but you need to like urgently get that going. Because you've made a massive investment there, and it's an investment that if you actually got it going in the right way, could be transformative in terms of connecting you to other places, connecting this to your core downtown, making your core downtown and surrounding neighborhoods places that are more viable and for so many more people. This is an investment opportunity that is dying to be capitalized on.
So by getting it going, I'm sorry, but by getting it going, you mean what?
I mean, I gotta get off the damn train and be able to get a cup of coffee with a friend. I gotta be able to not have to walk through a patch of sand pickers to get to my house. I gotta be able to ride my bike to this place and park it, and get on a train and go somewhere and not have just the whole thing disrespect my human experience. Over here, please.
Much in that same vein, I'm sure you noticed that Stroads are kind of pillars to how Petaluma is set up. You have Petaluma Boulevard here right in the downtown, Washington, where I live out on Western, and those are your classic Stroads, but then there's neighborhoods, but then you can't really go anywhere without going on those roads. So when we talk about, do those go to become roads and arterial? You kind of get rid of access points. Do those become more streets? Can it be a hybrid at different areas, or were you struck by any thoughts around that?
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's a really hard question. I'm gonna answer in a way that will be dissatisfying. Okay.
Set my expectations.
Yeah, I'm setting the bar low. So I've referred a number of times to the insolvency problem. I wrote a whole book about this. Strong Towns, Bottom Revolution. Go read it. I did a Zoom presentation with people in this community earlier and went over that. So you're going to have to kind of trust me here a little bit because I'm not going through all the. It's an hour-and-a-half presentation. So, but the way the insolvency problem works itself out is that you have built more roads than you have the tax base to actually maintain. Not by a little, by a lot. You've also done this insane thing where you've said the source of our community's income. So I look at local government not as like the bottom algae feeding layer of government. I look at local government as the way we come together to do stuff. Okay? For some reason, you decided in this state that the largest source of locally generated revenue was going to be locked in and could only increase like a tiny amount every year, aka Prop 13. So you said to your government, we're going to make you dysfunctional and we're going to make you reliant on new development on the edge just to cash flow your day-to-day operations. This was just patently insane, right? At the same time, what we see is that the cost of construction before this big inflation spike was multiple times the cost of increase that you got every year in your property tax budget. So you have baked in insolvency into your system, just without all the external craziness that is going on now, which is only making that worse. What this means functionally, and I'm just going to put a number in your head as a high number, meaning I think it's worse than this. Half of your roads will never be maintained. Actually, I think less than that, because there's a certain acceleration factor, but half of them will not be maintained. And if this feels bizarre to you, recognize that Detroit was one of the wealthiest cities in the country. 70 years ago, 80 years ago, they were the pioneers of the approach that we copied. They're 30 years ahead of you. Half of your roads won't be maintained. And so the question becomes, I have all these arterials and Stroads and all this, and what do we do? And here's when we talk about the four-step approach, what we're really talking about is a way to identify the neighborhoods that are going to thrive in the coming generation. Because if I go to neighborhood A, and I'm like, all right, people are having a difficult time crossing the street here. We'll do this little project and see what we go. And neighborhood A is like, yeah, we love that. And I go to neighborhood A and I'm like, you know what, we're going to change the zoning code so you can put small houses in here and you can get things started. And they're like, yeah, bring that on. And we're going to allow people to put these storage shed commercial places out here. And you're like, yeah. Neighborhood A is where I'm going to invest my money. If I'm you, if I'm the municipal corporation of Petaluma. I go to neighborhood B and I'm like, we're going to do this little thing. And neighborhood B is like, no way. You're not doing that. Let the guy put in an ADU. You can't do that. This is my single family home neighborhood. I paid for this. That's the neighborhood I say, you're on your own. Like I don't prioritize that neighborhood with the limited resources I have. So the question you have is like, what becomes of this? And to me, the answer is go meet your neighbors. Go learn to do things together with your neighbors. Go learn to be a neighborhood together that advocates for themselves in this larger system. And if you can build something together that is viable, and you can create a partnership with the city where that accelerates upward, you will be the place that survives and is saved, not the place that is ultimately walked away from.
Natural evolution.
Yeah. All right, any more depressing questions?
Beautiful street where you live, are there ADUs being built in that neighborhood?
It's a great question.
With the trees, the old growth?
Yeah, it's a great question. The short answer, I mean, I would say that I am aware of two, but it's not, they're not legal. So, no, let me be very clear. We had this conversation at dinner tonight. I am an active member of my community. I used to be on the planning commission. I try to do a lot. Part of the reason why I'm here talking to you tonight is because I got really frustrated that no one would listen to me, and I started writing a blog. And that blog grew into something where I get invited to do stuff like this. But I've only gained credibility at home the further I've kind of migrated my work away. And it's funny because people quote me now at our city council meetings who have never actually spoken to me. We're not there yet. We're hopefully getting there, but we're not there yet. I would not point to my city as a model to follow. I would point to my city as a model to understand our human challenges. Please.
So your street was like a freeway, except it had trees.
Yeah.
How fast do people travel down that street? I went in bump ups and maybe even a few cars.
No, the story of my street is actually very sad. So I'm on 4th Street. If you go one street over 5th Street, the streets are the same width. My street has parking on one side and has wide lanes, mandated by the state, because my street is funded with state aid money. State aid money is federal gas tax dollars. Remember the infrastructure bill thing? Federal money that gets siphoned to the state for local state aid streets. My street is designated as a state aid street. It runs right through a small neighborhood, but what they've been able to do is configure a pathway that connects one county road, county state aid highway, to an actual state highway, and they've designated that as a state aid route. And so the city can use state aid funds to fix my street, but that means they have to make it into a highway. The street one over is the same size. There's parking on both sides, there's trees that are closer, there's nicer sidewalks, it's a more beautiful street, it's a nicer street, same kind of development, same everything, much slower traffic, all local money. That's why I hate the federal DOT. Seriously, let me give you the worst example I've ever seen. Santa Ana, a very poor city in California. A city of, I'm gonna throw some stats up that I think are relatively accurate. Don't quote me like specifically on them, but it's like the 5th most dense city in North America. People per square mile. They have something like 40% undocumented. It's like 80% of families own one vehicle or less. They've had a huge shift in terms of their number of trips that are taken by bike and walk. It's like one of the highest percentages in the state. It's like 40%. It's really, really high. A lot of very poor people live in Santa Ana. It's a if you walk around the neighborhoods, it's a beautiful place. When you think of a single family home in Petaluma, you probably think of a single family. And in Santa Ana, they also think of a single family. But their idea of a single family is mom, dad, kids, cousin who's visiting, grandpa and grandma, an aunt that is looking for a place to crash for a few months. It's very beautiful. Human space. Your Caltrans has Highway 5 that runs through Santa Ana. Massively congested. They went to the city of Santa Ana, again, impoverished city, and said, hey, we got money for you to fix local streets. How's that sound? They're like, yeah, we would love money to fix our local streets. Here it is. The only thing that we are going to require is that the street be used during high congestion periods as overflow for the highway. So your signals have to be timed, to get fast traffic through here. Your roads have to be wide, no parking, all this stuff. We're gonna run a highway through your neighborhoods. You still want the money. Yeah, we don't have any money. And so your state is victimizing one of your poorest cities so that people can drive quickly during rush hour south of Los Angeles. I find that sickening. And the system that does that, I want to burn to the ground. Please, sir. And then,
we've had some small successes, although here in Petaluma, through the power of our neighborhood and micro neighborhood, we changed the speed limit on 6th Street here in town. It was
Okay.
30 miles an hour.
yeah,
It was not totally unreasonable if you were riding 50 miles an hour.
right.
But, by gathering signatures on a petition and going to the city council, this was years ago.
I think I see where this is going.
Yeah, well, they call it a federally maintained road, so there's no way we can change the speed limit. But it took a traffic engineer who worked for the city to step up and say, no, 30 miles an hour is way too fast.
Yeah,
Now, and so it got changed. Now
Right.
25 seems too fast.
Yeah.
You go for 20.
it is.
But that's not my question here. And what I really wanted to ask you, in a small town, how does a town resist these big box stores coming in? How does that affect traffic? I come from a small town in New Hampshire, tourist town.
Yeah,
They turn to Main Street, and every summer they close the street. No traffic, just people.
yeah,
It's happening around the country.
Right.
In different, and so it galvanizes people to get out, walk through the middle of town, enjoy the stores.
yeah,
No cars whatsoever.
right.
But, so there's a couple of instances, but big box stores did create these arteries
Right.
that are irresistible.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Big box stores are kind of the quintessential parasite that has evolved out of this development pattern. We welcome the parasite in. But it doesn't change its nature. That's kind of a provocative way to say it because I want to maybe temper it by saying I don't hate big box stores. You shouldn't hate the player, you should hate the game. And it's the game that has created the big box store. If you look at a big box store, what you get, let's start from the state government standpoint. By facilitating a transportation system, which is what the state does, that evolved this parasite, the big box store. And you can look at other parasites like the franchise drive-through restaurants and the strip malls and like all those things. But the big box store is kind of like the quintessential thing that you can get our mind wrapped around. If you are the state, this is a welcome advancement. The state gets a ridiculous amount of money from sales tax. You're like, oh, we get sales tax. Yeah, you get that much, the state gets that much, right? So for the state, they measure success in terms of transactions. Big box stores generate tons of transactions. And so for the state to have a big box store that as a big franchise would just send them regularly large checks is a dream come true. To have 1,000 little stores that they gotta pay, are you paying your sales tax properly? When we talk to you, I know it's only like $4,000, but this is a bureaucratic burden. It is much cleaner to have one franchise paying you enormous sums of money. Those franchises are happy to have their status and position in this ecosystem as kind of the primary parasite. If you look at the local government, the math gets a little more complex because the local government doesn't generally get that much sales tax. I mean, you get a tiny fraction of what goes on. And well, it's not insignificant, it really is it's small potatoes compared to what else is going on. But you get this property tax boost, and particularly when everything else is frozen from Prop 13, all of a sudden a big box store looks like a really great thing because they're going to pay more of a market rate of tax. They're happy to do that. It comes again in one big block. You don't have to deal with 50 different permits and all this stuff. You just got one big player. They're a corporation, so they're generally, they're not going to put a float in your 4th of July parade because they don't give a damn about your community. But they're also not going to be a burden to you, calling the police, and like having trash strewn about and all this. So they're very easy to deal with. They just send their check, right? A very nice, clean relationship. But with the big box store, you generally get the first generation of public investment paid for. You get exaction fees, you get the infrastructure built, you get all this, and it's bequeathed to you. And the thing about a big box store is that these are buildings designed to last 12 to 15 years. People are shocked by that, like, I know big box stores have been around 20, 25 years. Yeah, internally they amortize them as a company over a dozen years. So they depreciate it out over that time. So after a dozen years, they're, in their sense, like free and clear to do whatever they want. And this one was shot, I can't remember what city in California this photo was taken, but literally, I'm not joking you, over here is a new Walmart, and over here is the old Walmart. They are across the street from each other. And this one is boarded up, and this one is new and slightly bigger. And the reason was because when Walmart got to the end of that 12 to 15 year lifespan, depreciated out, they looked at their store and they said, we can put X amount of in to fixing this store up and stay in this location, or we can put 1 point whatever X into building a new store across the street, and the math of that made more sense, so they closed the one and moved across the street. That is parasitic behavior, right? The city then has all that infrastructure that is now on your balance sheet. You have to maintain the road. You have to maintain the sewer. You have to maintain the water service. You have to maintain the drainage systems. If you add up that cost and you look at the revenue you get from that big box store, the costs are here and the revenue is here. It's not even close. It's one of the worst investments as a community you can make. And we make it repeatedly over and over and over again. If we did the math on these things, we would never allow another one to build. We would actually make them illegal in our zoning code. But we don't. We don't. And I think like the cultural conversation we would have to do that is really big, because if you go to Manhattan, Manhattan has Home Depot. Manhattan has Target. I remember being in Zermatt, Switzerland. It's where the Marohn is. You got to take like a weird train to get there. It's very remote. They have McDonald's. Does McDonald's look like a McDonald's here? No, it's in like the chalet, tucked in with all these other things. We can have Home Depot. We can have Walmart. We can have Target. But they have to fit the structure of our city. My town used to have, my city used to have JCPenney's downtown. And you know what? It was like it was a beautiful retail store. It had apartments above it. It fit into the downtown. And when it closed, they closed and moved out to the mall. When it did that, guess what came in? Other retailers. Because that box, that structure was not a parasite. It was not a single-use building. It was a adaptable, flexible use building. I would welcome the business in. I would reject the business model. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I feel like that's ground you can stand on mathematically as a community. You had a question, right?
So, just wondering, are there places that are doing it right? Like,
yeah, that's the most frequent question I get.
yeah.
No. And let me say this. The question I get most, and this is not what you asked, but I'm gonna say it this way. The question I get asked the most, particularly by like city officials, is show me the city that's doing it right so I can copy them. And I'm going to tell you that that is not how evolution works. You have to evolve locally a way of doing this that is unique and works for you. I go around the country and I look at comp plans. In fact, tomorrow morning I'm going to meet Sacramento. You know what they want me to do right away? Talk to them about their comp plan. And I can tell you exactly what their comp plan says. It says, what every comp plan says, we are a unique city. There's no city like us. We do things differently here. And guess what? They have the same code, the same streets, the same everything that every city across the U.S. does. We actually have to be that. We have to be unique. And so if you ask me, are there cities we can learn from? I could point you to all kinds of places. I think Memphis is one of the most exciting cities in North America. Now, it's dirt poor. I don't know as the lessons there translate directly to here. If you went there, it would be jarring to you because it would look so much different than what you have. But I love the way that Memphis has humbled their processes to actually focus on neighborhood-led initiatives. They allow their neighborhoods a lot of latitude to step up and take ownership, and then the city has, almost as a servant, gone in and said, how do we support that? And I find the approach just invigorating. There's parts of Shreveport that have done similar work. Shreveport, again, is another city that I think you would have a tough time relating to, like physically. It is very different layout and design than you, but they're much poorer. And their poor, their poor disposition, their impoverishment has made them like ridiculously innovative. So if you go there, they have parks that they've completely renovated with volunteers only. That you have volunteers and a little bit of local philanthropy, and you step back and you look at it like that's one of the nicest parks I've ever seen in one of the poorest neighborhoods in America. But it's a park that is nice because it respects and relates to the surrounding neighborhood, and it's incrementally making those neighborhoods better. So I always hesitate to identify a place that has it figured out. I feel like the Strong Towns approach is not a destination. It is a process. So I always tell people, if you're thinking of Strong Towns, you should think of it more like diet and exercise than you should think of it as like being ripped, right? Because if you get shredded, right, you will be that way for a short period of time, and then it will go away, and you will look terrible. If you have diet and exercise, you can be very healthy for a very long time. And so Strong Towns we should think of as like diet and exercise, as opposed to a destination. Are we good? Okay, please.
So the disappearance of front porches and decks, for me, is kind of one thing that is the demise of social capital and connecting people with their neighbors. What are there kind of codes, or is that even a part of developing thought for developing new housing structures?
Yeah. So you've touched on something that I think is very important. But I want to preface it by saying that this is a very controversial topic. Because there's a lot of traditional neighborhood design that gets intermingled with discussions of traditional families, traditional family structures. And I think I'm going to preface my answer by saying, I think in our minds we need to divorce those things. There's a lot of discussion when we talk about classical architecture. And classical architecture doesn't mean just the Lincoln Memorial and the White House and the Capitol building. It actually means this building here, which is very classical. There's, the one that's for lease up the street is a beautiful classical building. Classical does not mean Nazi, but we sometimes intermingle those things because Nazis love classical architecture. So did Romans, we're kind of a Roman, Greco-Roman form of government. So I think it's important to recognize that these are two different conversations. That being said, if you look at human habitat, which is the way we describe cities prior to the Great Depression, you are looking at, let me use this analogy. If we look at a beehive, we recognize that a beehive coexists and co-evolved with bees. Bees built this structure that is actually meant for them. It makes them fully bees, right? If you look at the bee social structure, you look at the way bees interact, you look at the way bees live throughout a year, the queen, drones, all of bee, it all works in a hive. If we went into a bee hive and we said, you know what, we got this great idea for getting a lot more honey. We're gonna have bee cul-de-sacs and bee frontage roads and bee interchanges, and we're gonna build all this stuff. We kind of intuitively know that we would wind up with neurotic bees, right? Like the bees would not thrive in that. If we look at human habitat, what we have to be humbled by is how very similar it looks around the world prior to this post-war experiment. We can go to ancient cities in the Middle East, we can go to Asian cities, we can go to European cities, we can go to this city right here and look at its pre-depression development pattern. And what we see is a facsimile, a copy of, with local vernacular, certainly, but we see a basic layout and design that would be familiar to humans for thousands of years. People could have shown up. We could have plucked someone out of ancient Rome or ancient Athens, dropped them into Petaluma in 1925. They wouldn't have known the language, they wouldn't have known the customs, but they probably would have been able to find something to eat, find a bathroom, figure out where to stay, and do all the things that you need to do in the course of the day. Because this was a pattern that evolved with us. We built cities optimized to us. If you want a freaky book, freaky in a good way, there's a book called Cognitive Architecture. And it goes into the way our brains interact with the built environment. And they've done these tests on people who are far on the autism spectrum. And they've done the tests with people who have traumatic brain injuries. And they have tried to understand how they interact with the built form. And what they find is that, let me try to say this in the way that they would say it, which is more scientific than what I'm capable of for this discussion. They would say something along the lines of, a brain that has suffered trauma or damage is going to interact in strange ways with a traditional development pattern. But a typical brain, there's a scientific word for this that is better, but a brain that is not either high on the autism spectrum or has suffered some type of trauma is very comforted by kind of traditional building environments. Walt Disney Corporation. Have we all been to Disneyland? We know what I'm talking about? There's a book that I've got at home called The Architecture of Reassurance. Disney has, the reason why there's a Main Street USA in Disney is to comfort, it's a very comfortable environment for people to be in, architecturally. The way they lay out their buildings, the spacing between them, the way they put things at the end of the street and then frame the street with the buildings. All of this is done with deep, deep intention to calm people down, make them very comfortable, make them reassured, and then have you take out your wallet. And so if we take all that except for the wallet away from that, what we recognize is that human habitats of the past that evolved with us were designed to make us fully human. I think we could talk about front porches and community and all that, like coming out of that conversation, but I think I would just rest on, they made us fully human. If you look at our way of building today, in many ways it makes us less human. It separates us from each other. It makes us less communicative with each other. It makes our interactions more mechanical. It makes our relationship with the environment around us more mechanical. We've lost touch with, and I'll say this as a Catholic, you can go visit religions around the world and visit secular people within them around the world, but we've lost touch with the monuments and the grand things that we built that reminded us of who we were and what we thought was important in life. How many of you have visited a cemetery lately? We used to put those right in our neighborhood, so you would walk through them, and they were green space that we would care for and love in admiration of the people who came before us, and recognizing that we were going to be there someday as well. These things are all part of what make us human, and we've separated ourselves systematically from all of them.
How do you put those back in when asking?
One at a time.
We were asking
One
for
at a time.
density.
Yeah.
How are we putting back into green spaces? Because I see a lot of building going on that where I see most people interacting is the green spaces, areas where people are walking their dog.
Yeah.
The park, or their children.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know as it's green space per se. We were fortunate enough a year ago to take my wife and I take our daughters to Rome, and Rome has very limited, it's got some nice green spaces, but very limited, but it has a lot of squares and gathering places. And those are ridiculously social spaces. I think we should look at it, instead of green space, more as just social space. We have designed antisocial spaces. That's what the suburban experiment is designed to, from the way we do zoning codes, to the way we finance, to the way we, actually go physically construct, to the way we market and sell, is all selling you isolation. And humans don't thrive in isolation. I'm a ridiculous introvert. This wears me out. We're going to go have a dinner afterwards, and I will be honest with you. It's the thing I look forward to the least. Not because I don't love all of you and respect and want to have conversations, but as an introvert, I need a 2-hour car ride now to calm my brain. But that doesn't mean that I don't benefit from the interaction, and it doesn't mean that I would be a better person without it. And I think what we've done is we've enabled a development pattern that allows us to do the thing that is comfortable and not the thing that is good. And I think you see it manifested in some ways in our politics, because it's very easy to personify the other and grow to distrust them, grow to dislike them, grow to want bad things for them. And maybe you would even vote for a lunatic for president if they hurt the person you personify you don't like. I think that this all to me comes from a similar place. So when you ask about front porches, I feel like a front porch is where we start maybe. But we all have to start by trying to do the uncomfortable, including me. Afterwards, we're going
Thank you, Chuck, for being here. Just a couple of things before we close. And we can hang around for a while longer. Chuck, maybe you can spend a few minutes just for a few introductions and conversations. But one thing I want to say before closing is teeing up the rest of Urban Chat Summer, because Chuck did an incredible job. And truly, I did not brief him, but he hit some of the high points we're planning on hitting as the summer goes on. He mentioned the need for neighborhoods to keep the traffic from getting downtown to the freeways, etc. The group here in the front row, with Pete, with me, and with City Hall, has secured a grant from the American Institute of Architects Sustainable Design Assistance Team, AIA SDAP. A group of architects will be coming to town August 5th through 8th to meet with the public, to talk about how to graft, how to plow the ground for neighborhoods to grow as places where we can do our daily business. That's going to happen. It's going to be a good team coming to town. There will be opportunities for you to put your input in. Put that in your calendars, August 5th through 8th. One thing that's going to happen for those neighborhoods to exist is retail. I mean, we don't see retail in neighborhoods. Raised is damn near unique. It's great in my neighborhood. I love it. But it's unique. We can't have that. We've reached out to a consultant who is eager to talk to us through Zoom, one of our Know Before You Go meetings, on how to plow the ground for neighborhood retail. In fact, oddly enough, as I'm riding around on the bus today with Chuck and the others, I'm emailing back and forth with him trying to discuss what date to do it on. So we think we're just coming together really nicely. And then we heard about TOD. Mary, you raised the question, Chuck, you had a great response. I've been exchanging emails. Well, best story I've got, yesterday, we're all unhappy that SMART didn't do more to create TOD, and it's a legitimate concern. But there's a new general manager at SMART. I went home yesterday trying to get ready for today, trying to get ready to go on vacation. My phone rings, unfamiliar number, I'll go ahead and answer it anyway. It's the SMART general manager saying, when can we get together and talk about TOD? This is an incredible sea change. We have a consultant lined up who will come to town, do something like Chuck did today. I don't have a date yet. We're discussing back and forth what days are going to work. But I know the city manager wants to be involved. I know Keith McCoy, who may have already left, whatever Nick wants to be involved. I know the SMART general manager wants to be involved. We're going to help facilitate this conversation, and it will probably conclude with an evening meeting much like this to discuss how to get TOD going in this town. So, Chuck did a great job of laying out the path. We're already moving on that path. It's all coming together. Thanks for being here. I think the bar is still open in the lobby. Feel free to grab a drink, come back in, get to know each other even more, and discuss what we can do going forward. Thank you.
Not enough for bikes.
But my guess is that, particularly in this area, there is an overarching social, cultural concern about the lack of parking.
But there's always space in the garage.
Why then have you taken this street, which you're trying to get people to go to this place and that place and all this, and said its highest and best use is for throughput and no on-street parking?
Going out to Bodega, that's the biggest reason. This is a high place for weekend people going out to Bodega and going all to the Pacific.
What's Bodega?
Bodega is a large tourist area.
So people are going to the ocean.
Correct.
Okay.
So everybody from the central
So let me ask
California.
this: does Petaluma go to the ocean? No, right? It's here, and the ocean is here. Okay. So now let me personify. I am for a minute going to be the city of Petaluma, and I'm going to look at my own priorities as a city. Right? As a city, my priority is growing my capacity, my tax base, my wealth, my prosperity, and doing that at, in a sense, the limited or most reasonable cost that I can. I want to have a really wealthy tax base that I can sustain and grow over time. When I look at this, to me this conflicts with my goals, because what this does is it says, instead of privileging or making a priority all the properties that are around here, the success of that business, the success of that business, the success of this thing, the ability to walk across from that neighborhood to that neighborhood, all the things that would make this place more valuable, in my estimation, as the city of Petaluma, my portfolio better. I have opted instead to privilege the people who are driving through my city to get you're shaking your head. Why have I not done that? What have I done?
Because one, this is a very old. They can be improved. It's not only I just want to know if you're representing the savings.
No, but if I'm saying I'm representing if I'm in this city, manager of the city council, if I'm running the city council, and I'm looking at the things I have to juggle, this to me is saying to my actual constituent, your life is going to be less prosperous Well, I'm watching them do it. You know,
So I've been here, I've worked here for 32 years in the police department. I've been in charge of the traffic unit for 20 years. Know the traffic really well, lived in Petaluma, grew up here, know the city really well. Done all the speed surveys, everything, know all about it. Yeah, this is not one of our big pedestrian problem areas. Really the boulevard is speed limits, all our surveys right here. It's not over 10 miles an hour right here. It's actually pretty slow right here. It's almost
Just recently, I sit with the Caltrans initiative, recognizing some of the problems, that is the right lane, right turn only, so at least there are fewer cars to miss as you try to make your left turn. But of course, not everybody understood the right turn lane based on the way the street sign now looks.
Yeah, not coincidentally, it's destroyed presumably by a car.
Oh yeah, well, you can see the skid marks.
So actually a motorcycle, one of our motorcycle officers was sitting right there and had to jump off because the car came over that sign and over his motorcycle.
Oh my God. I hadn't heard that, thank you. Anyway, Krista or Gina, you probably have more insight than I do. I'm just an observer. And Chuck, I'm sure you've seen this many places. Let's talk about it.
I'll just point out that it is one of our great frustrations that we have jurisdictional issues here with the state.
At which point does this become state highway?
At the freeway.
Oh, from the freeway here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all state. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And so not only that, but they also have all the maintenance and timing for the intersections along here, which is also very challenging. So we found that that's been really when we've tried to make changes here and northward, it's been difficult.
And Caltrans viewing it as one of their, I don't know if they consider rural type highways, but you don't have traffic calming, you don't have bike lanes, you don't have sidewalks, you don't have trees, any of those things that kind of naturally slow traffic, because from the traditional viewpoint, you don't want those near a roadway. They could be dangerous to a car driving through, or the cars being out of control, because that's a primary design function of these kind of roads from that perspective. You know?
Yeah, based upon severity of collision, this is our worst intersection. We've been fishing Caltrans for years, and they're all like, you need more fatalities, which is sad. In order to make significant changes. And if you add up, I think, going back to when I started, I think we're up to almost 28 fatalities right here at this intersection.
A year?
No. Total.
Probably
but
over
a wave lot
or
of other ones that weren't fatalities, just as serious.
And the near misses that are off the charts.
Anything that we can do to redefine that in between maintenance cycles? I mean, is there any kind of guerrilla tactics that we can take to?
I feel like we have to learn the right lessons here. Right? How did this happen? Because this didn't happen by accident. This happened by progression. Right? So the manual on uniform traffic control devices would dictate essentially when this intersection grows up. Engineers tend to look at intersections, roadways, the way that we look at children, right? They're born infants, they mature to toddlers, they mature to adolescents, teenagers, they go through puberty and become little adults, then they grow. Engineers look at intersections the same way. We have an intersection here, and when this was put in, the manual on uniform traffic control devices said, here's how much traffic you have going this way, and here's how much you have going this way. That ratio doesn't justify a signal. But someday you'll grow up, someday you'll get older, someday you'll get more mature. You'll have more traffic going this way, more traffic going this way. And then we can start to talk about, improvements, adding a signal, adding a right turn lane, adding other safety features. We can start to do these things once you reach that level of maturity in your intersection. The measurements of doing that are how many people have died, How many crashes has there been? How many people walking have been killed? There's a whole bunch of statistics that allow you to, in a sense, mature your intersection through the manual uniform traffic control devices. Here's the lesson. The manual and uniform traffic control devices does not have to work that way. Here's another way to look at the manual and uniform traffic control devices. We know before we write a permit for this office building and that office building and that, and we design this road and we put this in, we can guesstimate, we know how much traffic there is here. We can guesstimate pretty accurately how much flow there's going to be here. And we can say, you know what, 5 years from now, we're going to have this many people getting killed out here. 10 years from now, we're going to have to spend of our money $2.5 million, $4 million, $5 million putting in intersections. We know that 15 years from now, we're going to be compelled to spend a whole bunch of money on safety features. We can look at those things way up front. And you know what we can make a decision on? That's a bad investment for us. That doesn't make sense. When we do the financial modeling of things like this, I realize that these places create a lot of jobs. I realize that we look at this as like an investment in growth and capacity. But I'm telling you, none of these things have to be in this location, this configuration. And when we run the numbers on them, they're generally cash flow negative. They generally, over a life cycle, cost you more to provide ongoing service and maintenance to than they're generating for you in tax base. And so you've made a negative returning investment that is also compelling you to make another investment just to stop people from dying. So the reason we got here is because we bought into a certain development paradigm that financially is not building your wealth, but is going the opposite direction.
The so-called business park that's beautiful, but you have to ride your bike 7 miles or drive a car to get to work there.
Yeah, let's not pretend that this is a bike, you know. To me, when we say something is bikeable, it means that my like little kid can bike there, or like my mom will bike there. If you're saying like if you told me like the people dying in bike crashes here are 40-year-old to 60-year-old men, I'm telling you, like, the reason that is not because that group is like extra reckless or whatever.
So that they can't afford a car.
Well, that's the only people brave enough to bike in this area.
Or they have no other way to get there.
Yeah, but I'm not letting my 8-year-old bike in that.
You judge the
right?
safety of some facilities oftentimes by the number of women and kids that use it.
That's exactly.
Because
yes.
if it's not a safe facility, they never come out to begin with.
Never even
It's
go
only
there.
the more reckless
Right.
young single men.
Yes.
So that's an indicator of
Yes.
success, is having a high percentage of women on like a bike with that
Yes,
facility.
that's exactly it. So, you know, you look at this right now, and I want to make sure we learn the right lesson, because the right lesson goes back a couple decades from when this was envisioned, and none of this outcome is like difficult to envision with that starting point. So the question now becomes like, what do you do? And you've essentially committed yourself to a situation where you have very fast traffic at relatively high volumes intersecting with a high volume of turning traffic, and turning movements are always more complex because someone coming, you can see that you put in turn lanes, right? To get cars, you know, separated from the traffic stream, because when people slow down to turn, if they don't use their signal, if someone's looking down at the radio or their phone, you get rear ends, you get people knocked into other lanes, you get just the random, what this intersection is like a randomizer, right? And if you say 1 out of every 5,000 statistically random events are not going to work out well, okay? If you've got 500 of them a day, that means every 10 days you're going to have something. If you jack that up to 1,000 a day, every 5 days you're going to have something. So it's a randomizer, and you run that, you roll those dice so often, and most of the times it will be fine, but every now and then there's going to be a crash. And so what happens is we go in then and spend money to decrease the frequency of the randomizer, but it still is going to be a randomizer. You're still going to have random crashes because of you can't have fast-moving traffic with turning movements without having crashes. You cannot design a system that would be safe. dysfunctional by design. And so what you have to choose is, where do you want that dysfunction to manifest? And what you've kind of said is that we want the dysfunction to manifest in this death out here, crashes out here, random occurrences out here. You can decide we want that to manifest in traffic going somewhere else, but I don't know if there's another intersection like this over there.
It's a lighted intersection down the street.
The next one down is like this.
And there is a
direct them to a signal. In which case,
right. But will people drive more aggressively then? Will they go right out of here and then do a U-turn up there?
There is a sign here to go that way, but the impact is over there, and you usually don't get that first green light to make the left turn, and so people are still, they know that, and still take this.
I'm saying, people do weird stuff, right?
They do.
Like traffic,
I've had to be.
I think engineers tend to look at traffic systems as static systems when they're ridiculously dynamic. Everybody in their car makes decisions dynamically about where to go and where to turn, what the optimum route is. So if you do funnel people that way, who are going to turn left, some of them will do it. If the traffic gets really bad there, some will turn right and go up the road and turn around. Some will come here and turn left anyway.
Yeah, there's this sidewalk here and a bench over there. Who the hell's going to walk there?
Yeah, no.
Where would you be walking to?
But this
Why would
is
you go sit on that bench?
but this is standard office park.
We put in pedestrian facilities.
Right. This is office park design. So office parks are designed to be presented to two groups. Planning commission, city councils, right, like city approval people, and they like to see nice renderings with sidewalks and mature trees and all this. Like this looks good in a plan, and then it's also presented to Wall Street investors, who again are looking at the same kind of visual effect of a plan. Understand what neither of those groups do. Neither of those groups are interested in the human experience on the ground, and so you wind up with something that is an aesthetic appendage to a plan, not like a functional piece of infrastructure for the community. I was telling, we were talking on the way over here, and I said, it might be an apocryphal story, but it's a good story nonetheless. Walt Disney he had an apartment at Disneyland, and he would get up in the morning and walk around the park smoking a cigar in his bathrobe. That's not apocryphal, that actually happened. The story is his workers were putting up a fence. And he said, what are you doing? And he said, well, people keep cutting through here. We're putting up a fence to keep them here. And Walt Disney said, no, you got it backward. If that's where they're walking, that's where you put the sidewalk. And the fence should go, where the old sidewalk used to be. And I feel like the takeaway insight for that is, a good design does not channel people. A good design responds to how people naturally use a place. And we could stand out here for a very long time and not witness anyone using any of this.
Anywhere close to schedule, we probably should start walking back to the bus.
I've actually...
If I get the conversation started on a different path here.
That's the tough challenge.
Lynch Creek Trail is probably the most beloved bike trail in Petaluma.
Yay!
The west end of the Lynch Creek Trail ends at the barricade you see on the far side. It continues here. Can we see the problem? Yeah. Related to that, which isn't that bad, but still, it makes my size so marginal. Similarly, a project right here, senior housing, there's the blue project into the property, and there are folks who want to put houses down here. We have all of them that mentioned here. What we have on this side, the community center, the park, the big Tuesday farmers market, all the attractions for those people, and once again, not a great place to get to. I'm dropping the ball, let's see how people respond to it.
Question for you. A lot of cities, what they would do to improve it here is they would do a pedestrian bike.
Well, I think people want housing, that would be your endpoint.
But if so, that would eliminate the use of areas. Do you think that's a project?
This is the classic Strode problem. And the Strode problem we can think of it as a design problem, but it's not as much as it's a philosophical problem of what we're trying to accomplish. Are we trying to build a street, or are we trying to build a road, right? A road is about moving vehicles quickly through a place. If you're trying to build a road, you would have this kind of geometry minus the traffic lights, because you'd be trying to move vehicles through as fast as you can. That is directly conflicted with the goal of a street, which is to build a place, build wealth, create investment.
It's not ideal, but
what you're trying to do here is both. You're trying to have through traffic at speed and volume, right? Along with growth and investment. And what you're finding is that that creates an enormous amount of conflict. The conflicts it creates are traffic flow, safety, what you call diminishment or marginalizing, but what I would just call like dysfunction, right? If you were designing an auto system and people had to stop and then like go here and go here to continue on straight, that would be absurd. It's absurd for bikes too. Like it's a dysfunction. You also get very low value investment. I know we look at these as like it's new homes, it's not, but if we start to compare the value of this investment to the value of the investment you had at the very first intersection we're at today, it's not even comparable. They're not even in the same range. This is multiple times less than that, and this will almost certainly have a negative long-term return on investment compared to that. And so I have to ask, like philosophically, what the goal that you're trying to accomplish here is. Because if it's to build a place, if it's to get investment, then we got to do something radical about the traffic flow. If it's about moving people and connecting places, then we got to change the development pattern, because the development pattern directly conflicts with the big public investment that's made here to move cars quickly. You can't have both in the same place. It doesn't work.
The thing that I appreciate this, I understand what you're saying. Electoral politics is huge.
Yeah.
And imagine being someone running for city council on getting rid of Strodes, on like changing all that stuff. It's so much change, like you just can't do it. You get absolutely crucified, right? So how do you get this stuff moving and build a narrative and
so you're
educate
asking
people
me to
so
be
that
a politician.
I'm saying that there's a political reality that is underlying
let's deal with that
the lack of logic that you're dealing with, right?
Let's deal
Politics
with that
is not
one.
rational.
So what if you look at this, what would you do?
Well, I would answer that question, right? Because this is a road. This is a vital connection between something over there and something over there. Is that what you're telling me? In that case, I'm not permitting anything else along. And I'm allowing the stuff here to just like go its course. I'm trying to close intersections. I'm trying to close this intersection. I'm trying to get that traffic down to that light. I'm minimizing conflict. I close this intersection. The only way in and out of this place is at that signal. I'm trying to make traffic flow as smooth as I can.
And if we want to go the other way.
If we want to go the other way, then I'm saying, first of all, the new development I permit has to be street oriented, because now we're trying to build a street. We're trying to slow things down. So you're not going to have a fence and landscaping and your electric boxes and have all those buildings be faced that way. They actually need to embrace the street. We built a community center attached to a parking lot. It would be the other way around in a design. So we would want to bring things up close to the street. Try to get on-street parking. We want to slow things down. We want to create more intersections along here where people stop. More edge friction, slower traffic. Create a place. I actually think here that is a harder thing to do. That would be, you'd have to be much more committed to that than to make this a road. To make it a road would be politically fraught because of all the development aspirations for it, but mechanically it'd be like way easier. It'd be much harder to like change our view of what this should be into a street.
Well, if Lynch Creek Trail is not just a place to look at the nature, but to get from way over there to the golf course or the park or the softball fields, then why don't you want to, I'm not suggesting this is a good idea or not, but why wouldn't you want to somehow create an underpass or an overpass here so people could just go right by and continue on this unbroken route? And then it becomes a true crosstown connector for non-automobiles.
That would be very nice, right? For people biking. I totally agree with you. I think my assessment of doing that project would be, how many bikers are we talking? How essential is this connection? Where could that money be spent on other biking and walking? I feel like, and I'm not suggesting that's the case here, but a lot of times when it comes to biking and walking infrastructure, we get very fascinated. We create a fetish out of what are, in a sense, recreational trail connections, which I think has a lot of importance. But we de-emphasize the things that actually create a culture of biking and walking. You make this connection, and the people who are already biking it, who are doing this, are going to be way more satisfied with the experience. They're going to like it, and they're going to enjoy it more, and people will say this is a great experience. How much will that amplify your culture of biking and walking versus spending that same amount of money actually making neighborhoods where people are struggling to bike and walk but having a difficult time of it, making it easier and getting way more people out to support it. Because my sense is you fix this and there's not a wave of momentum to fix that. You fix that and there's a wave of momentum to fix this. So you can get both that way. That's my gut reaction always to this. Is build the culture of biking and walking.
That's part of it. The biggest barrier.
Yeah.
Because I talked to them all the time. The biggest barrier that I hear is getting a bike that they don't feel safe because of the situation.
Right.
And in some of the areas, like, we have a bus trail all the way from Santa Rosa all the way out to Sebastopol.
Right.
There is always people on that trail.
Yeah.
And it's transportational as well as recreational. And same thing with this trail here. And the people who, there's some people like me who are going to ride their bikes everywhere anyway. But to get people to go on bikes, we need safe places, ways that they can get from where they want to go. And in this case, if you live on this side and you got to do something on the other side of town, this is the only option versus getting pulled over.
Let me put some numbers to it. Because I hear exactly what you're saying, and you're right. You are absolutely right. Here's I think the difference between what I'm suggesting. If we look at biking, walking, share of mobility, share of trips, 2%. I mean, that would be typical, right? Like, I don't know what it actually is in Petaluma, but I'm guessing. 2%, 3%, like that's fairly standard, fairly typical. If we increase that from 2 to 3%, from 3 to 4%, you're talking about 50%, 75% increase in biking and walking. You'd be like, that's astounding, that's amazing. But I'm telling you, that's not a culture of biking and walking. The goal, and I know you're with me with the goal, so we're talking about like the same aspiration. We got to get to 50%, right?
So get them used to and feel safe about riding their bike with their kids to school every day or every other day,
right?
Versus the once or 2 or 3 months trip across town that requires this ugly crossing there.
Well, and not only that, I think you would all be astounded if you looked at the number of 2, 3, 4, 6 block trips that people take.
60% of trips in our county are within 2 miles.
That people take by automobile.
Yeah.
And if you looked at that subset of those and said, which of those could easily be walking or biking trips, but for this small thing or but for this small thing, we can make a radical shift in biking and walking with a very minimal amount of money with that kind of approach. And if you get, if you get a mode share shift of 25%, now you got people who are, like, I'm going down to one car. I can make this work. And now those people are saying, I'm gonna show up at a council meeting and get this fixed, because this is messed up. Like, why is this way? Right, but then it's like self-evident, right? And now it's a sell. You got to sell it because it's not self-evident. For the dominant culture you have right now, this is self-evident. This is not, and that's your underlying problem. Is that the cultural expectation is wrong.
We ran a campaign called like with the number 2 instead of the number 2, and giving people a tool for drawing a 2-mile circle around your house.
Nice.
And asking people to pledge to making a trip within that circle to do it by bike.
Right.
We have about close to 200 people.
Nice.
But that's. Is right. How many people work within 2 miles of their house? Because we have fewer and fewer corner stores and all of these big, conglomerate shopping things within 2 miles. In Sonoma County, it's really easy to get inter-district school transfers, and so half the students, in this county, I was going to say, don't go to their local school. They go across that. And I live in Gachati. I have my friends' kids go to school here in Petaluma, and Sebastopol. Right, so
we go right back to where we started today. Yeah. And the goal of the street when we started today was to privilege the people driving through town at the expense of the people trying to walk across the street and trying to run businesses. Really, trying to make a successful city, you want to privilege the people who have chosen to locate there as opposed to the people who are choosing to live there. That's an emphasis, and it's a very real trade-off. You have said to people who own businesses there, you matter less to us than the non-resident driving.
That's where Home Depot is proposing to go.
Okay.
Most people don't.
Okay.
So, where some of us on the Jeep asked, we really would love to see housing down there.
Yeah.
Like affordable housing.
Right.
On the street. It's a long shot. The property owner probably won't get it, but it's something worth pursuing.
Okay.
If there was a project like that,
there's no right answer, okay? But I think about it this way. What we're trying to get to is not housing development, affordable housing, Home Depot. Those are things that fit into our zoning classification system that we have now. And the reason we have that is because we have this growth model of development. What's the next transaction? What's the next thing we build? A wealth model of development model that looks at building wealth in a place and creating a place has as its end goal a neighborhood. If you go down and say, I want to build affordable housing down there, my reaction is, well, you have one part of a neighborhood of which there are like 20 other parts. So you're creating a monoculture of something, but you're not actually building a neighborhood. And so that's why when you said, like, should this be a street or a road, what I'm really assessing is, what is the likelihood that this place could ultimately become a neighborhood? And to me, that feels really low. Because a neighborhood is going to have small shops and big shops. It's going to have small houses and big houses. It's going to have a variety of stuff. It's going to have parks. It's going to have connections. It's going to be a place. And And it's really hard to imagine that evolving here, particularly with the zoning framework and the development framework and the entitlement process and the way you go about assembling things. Very hard.
And I might add, another barrier is the regional housing allocation requirement from the state. So we're
right. So let's continue this line of thinking. Where could you build a neighborhood? And my answer is the neighborhood we started in is already a neighborhood. It's kind of atrophying and not becoming its best self. Where I would start is, how do we make that neighborhood its best self? And then continue to build on that success. Continue to expand that around where you already have it.
So it's just part of the conundrum here in Petaluma is that we have the east side and the west side. This is the east side. The east side tends to get ignored. You know, it's more industrial. It's more like this.
Well, it's all post-World War II.
Yeah, exactly. So there's not there are actually more people. Right. Yeah.
And let me say it from a strong town standpoint. It's all not financially viable long term. It's all one life cycle product.
Right.
So it is, in a sense, like a glorified ant camp. You know, like we built this stuff after World War II, not to create community, not to create a prosperous place, not to create something that would endure. We built it because we wanted the growth, we needed the jobs, we needed the transactions. And that's what you see.
So then does it all have to like be destroyed and then rebuilt, or how, you know, like what are ways to create pockets? Or
do you want the happy version or the real version?
You can give me the real version.
Okay. If you, and we were talking about this walking over here, if we went back to the 1930s and we said to people in the 1930s, the downtown that you know, in 20 years it's going to be all boarded up. Those buildings will be abandoned. No one will want to be there. You know, this house you're in and the neighborhood you're in, it's all going to fall apart. No one's going to want to live here. And everybody's going to want to live out there in that orange grove or that, cactus farm or whatever the heck it is. People would have said, you're nuts. Like, I can't imagine what that looks like. That's so foreign to the way I live and my experience that I can't envision it. Yes, your city, and this is, I can say this not knowing your particular budget, but just knowing California cities in general and U.S. cities in general, your city is built on a model that leads cities to deep levels of insolvency. You have more roads than you can maintain. You have more pipes than you can fix. You have more sidewalks than you can repair. And the end result of that is that this stuff will not be fixed. So pick half your roads. Which half your roads won't you maintain? Because you don't have money to maintain half. Which half will you
Can I just do the center half and leave the edges for gardens and water percolation?
Well, you see what I'm saying?
Well, I'm not
so
joking,
at some point,
kind of
the abandoned Kmart may become a Walmart, but at some point it will become an abandoned Walmart or abandoned Home Depot.
Yeah.
And nothing will replace it. Yeah. And at some point, these buildings will be a slum because you won't maintain this road. And I don't know what to do about that because they were bad investments.
You don't want to throw good money at
Right. So as rational people, we can either say, well, let's keep building this stuff and then someone else will deal with that. Or we can say, what does work? And when we look financially, the stuff that works, core downtown, surrounding neighborhoods, does really well. They're dying for investment. We can mature those places, we can grow those places, we can see jobs, we can see housing built there, we can see all kinds of stuff possible there. And the more successful we make that, the more capacity it will give us to do other things. The more we try to do this actually sucks our capacity out of us. So, yeah, I think we're going to, as a culture, say goodbye to a lot of stuff that seems very difficult to imagine saying goodbye to. Now, maybe people from San Francisco will move here and occupy your crappy places and love them and fix them up. But highly unlikely. And even if they do, they're not going to generate enough tax for you to actually maintain the infrastructure needed to serve them. So it's a moot point.
They're mostly coming in and buying all the charming Victorians.
They're buying the nice stuff.
They're buying
and
yeah.
you are winding up in
those lovely neighborhoods.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what's happening. So I'm sorry. It's not that part of the story is not happy.
Right.
The happy part is that we actually have a lot we can do, just not here.
Okay. Since you were describing them and some of the other parts of the city didn't all get so that's what was not going to get any project being this bigger phase of all big thing.
Yeah. No. Why do we have big things of all one thing?
Small person wants to go through it.
It's a variety of factors. One of them is that your process is broken, right? But I think that that's actually a byproduct. The reality is the way we fund this stuff, it's easier to get 20 million than it is to get 200,000. And so if you're someone who can get 20 million, you can build something big all at once. If you're someone who can't get 20 million but can get 200,000, you're going to struggle to get that, and you're going to wind up not able to build anything.
That's where things like projects like Matthews and the project I live in had rebuilt a neighborhood of 30 units in an existing neighborhood. We were well enough off that we were all able, we were able to come up with enough capital to get started with that.
Well,
get loans.
part of what we need to do is relocate. That's a bigger conversation.
What was that? Do what?
Relocalize capital. So that's a bigger conversation.
Because the only ones that can get 20 million are corporations.
Yeah, you're dealing with. I mean, your option for development today is: do we take this large Wall Street funded developer or this large Wall Street funded developer? And neither of them are going to be interested in working at the nuance or the scale that you need to be successful.
Or are they going to keep their money that they paid?
Right. No.
As much as I appreciate Chuck and stopping the clock, and I do appreciate it, we probably should keep going. We have one more walkthrough at the end of our day.
And we'll answer the politics question when we get to the bus.
Installed by Alan